Sophia Langley's eyes flickered to the man standing before her, Adrian Stone. Tall, sharp features softened only by the shadows in his eyes, but everything about him screamed danger. She felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a thick fog. This wasn't just another interview with a suspect. It wasn't even the first time they had met. He was there when Ethan died, and now he was the key to unraveling the web of corruption surrounding the man she once loved. But she hated him. Or at least she told herself she did. She couldn't afford to feel anything else. Sophia had been a detective for years, working her way up the ranks with steady determination, but this case, this one, was different. Ethan Caldwell had been a rising star in the high society, someone she had once shared her life with, and his sudden death had thrown her into a labyrinth of power, deceit, and questions with no answers. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk as she stood before Adrian, feeling a simmering frustration in the pit of her stomach. "I don't have time for games, Stone," she said, her voice steady, though her insides twisted. "I need answers, and you're the only one who can give them." Adrian's lips quirked slightly, an almost imperceptible movement, but his eyes never left hers. "You think I'm the answer, Detective?" His voice was low, measured, like he was savoring the moment. "Or are you just looking for a reason to believe you can still control the story?" His words pierced her thoughts, dragging her deeper into the puzzle that was Ethan's death. Adrian Stone wasn't just a man caught in the web. He was part of it, maybe even the architect of it. Sophia knew that he was dangerous, knew that he had something to hide, but there was something else there, something she couldn't quite place. The way he looked at her with that calm certainty, like he saw right through her. The way his presence stirred a storm of emotions she wasn't prepared to confront. "I'm not here to play games," she repeated, her voice sharper now. "This is about a man's life, a man you know well." Adrian's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, before his voice dropped into something quieter, more serious. "You're looking for the truth, Detective, but sometimes the truth isn't as clear as you want it to be." The words hung in the air, like a challenge, and Sophia could feel the tension between them thicken. She was used to interrogation rooms, used to holding her ground with criminals who didn't care. But this felt different. Every instinct in her told her to walk away, to keep him at arm's length. But another part of her, something deeper, more human, begged for more. Her mind raced with the questions she couldn't ask, the truths she wasn't ready to face. Who was Adrian Stone? What did he know? And why did she feel like she needed to know? Sophia took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't afford distractions. Not now. "You're either part of the solution, or you're part of the problem," she said, her voice cold. Adrian's eyes flickered, a hint of something. Amusement, curiosity, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "We'll see about that, Detective." As she turned to leave, the weight of the unspoken words between them pressed down on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, and that the game they were about to play would be one she might not be able to win. Sophia sat alone in her small office, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. She stared at the case file in front of her, the same file she had been poring over for the past few days. Yet the answers still eluded her. Ethan's face smiled up at her from the photograph, a reminder of the life they had once shared. It felt like a lifetime ago now, but the memories were fresh, sharp, and painful. He had been more than just a boyfriend. He had been her first love, her partner, her dream of a future. And now, he was gone. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes, trying to shake the exhaustion that seemed to cling to her. The investigation was getting more complicated by the day. Ethan's death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was part of something much larger, something she wasn't ready to confront. The deeper she dug into the tangled world of the elite, the more she realized how little she understood about the very people she had once aspired to join. Her mind wandered back to Adrian Stone, the man who seemed to have all the answers but refused to give her any. Every time she saw him, her heart twisted with conflicting emotions. He was the last person she should be drawn to. He had ties to the very corruption she was trying to expose. And yet, there was something about him that made it impossible for her to ignore. Was it his calm demeanor? The way he seemed to know her too well, even without speaking? Or was it the unspoken pain that lurked in his eyes? Sophia wasn't sure, but she hated herself for feeling anything other than disgust when he was around. But she wasn't here to deal with her feelings. She was here to find the truth. She opened Ethan's file again, her fingers trembling as she traced the edges of the papers. His death wasn't just a random act. Someone had made sure of that, and she was going to find out who. Sophia took a deep breath and stood up, pacing the room. She couldn't let herself be distracted. She had to focus on the investigation, on the facts, on the cold, hard truth. But the more she tried to push Adrian out of her mind, the more he seemed to take root. She hated that he had this power over her, hated that her thoughts kept drifting back to him, like some sort of dangerous addiction. The phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. She picked it up quickly, not bothering to look at the caller ID. "Langley," she said curtly. "It's me," came the voice on the other end, smooth and familiar. "Adrian." "I think we need to talk." Her pulse quickened, despite her best efforts to remain calm. "What about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The case. You're going about it the wrong way," Adrian said, his tone casual. But there was something in it that made Sophia's stomach drop. "I've got information that might help you, but you're going to have to trust me." Sophia's heart beat faster, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to slam the phone down, tell him to stay out of her investigation. But something stopped her. "I don't trust you," she replied quietly, her voice betraying more than she meant to. There was a brief silence before Adrian spoke again, his voice low and almost soothing. "I know, but you should." The line went dead before she could respond. Sophia stood there, staring at the receiver in her hand, her chest tight. She couldn't let him get to her. She couldn't afford to let Adrian Stone, with all his mystery and manipulation, get inside her head. But the truth was, he already had. And as much as she hated it, she knew that she couldn't keep pushing him away. Not yet. With a frustrated sigh, Sophia dropped the phone back onto its cradle. She wasn't sure if it was the case that was driving her mad, or if it was the man behind the case. The man who knew too much, too well. And the worst part? She wasn't sure which one scared her more. Sophia closed her eyes and pressed her hands to her temples, willing herself to focus. She had a job to do. Ethan's death couldn't be left to fade away into the shadows of high society. She would uncover the truth, even if it meant dragging her own heart through the mud. Edo Versailles, Zach. She wasn't going. Tatondubetato. Amosalabet Ezedas, let Adrian Stone, or anyone else, stop her. The days blurred together, each one more frustrating than the last. Sophia found herself haunted by the case in ways she hadn't anticipated. Ethan's death was not just a professional investigation, it was personal, entangled with the painful remnants of her past. But as much as she tried to compartmentalize, as much as she forced herself to keep a cool, professional demeanor, the lines began to blur between her role as a detective and something more. Her meetings with Adrian became the centerpiece of her days, a strange mix of unease and an unexplainable pull. The first time he had looked at her with that calm, steady gaze, she had felt it. Something unsettling, something that pushed all the right buttons in her mind, yet stirred emotions she couldn't acknowledge. Adrian was everything she had trained herself not to feel for. He was a part of the very world she was trying to expose, a criminal mastermind hidden behind the facades of high society. Yet, every conversation, every encounter chipped away at her resolve, revealing layers of complexity that she hadn't anticipated. She remembered the last meeting she had with him. She hadn't meant to be alone with him, but the case had drawn them together again. And for a brief, fleeting moment, the air between them had shifted. The usual tension, the awkward distance, had evaporated, leaving something else, something far more intimate, far more dangerous. "You're not like the others," Adrian had said, his voice low but carrying an edge of curiosity that caught her off guard. Sophia had looked at him sharply, her heartbeat quickening despite her best efforts to remain unaffected. "I'm not like them," she echoed, though she hadn't been sure what he meant by the others. The elite, the criminals, or simply the people in her life who had failed her. "You're different," he continued, his gaze steady on hers. "You don't wear your emotions like a mask. You hide them, just like I do." His words stayed with her long after their conversation had ended, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he saw something in her that no one else ever had. Was it the vulnerability she tried to bury? The frustration she hid behind her sharp tongue and relentless pursuit of justice? Or was it the growing sense that, just like her, he was trapped in a world that didn't quite fit him, constantly playing roles that weren't his own? The emotional weight of it all pressed down on her as she sat at her desk now, rereading the case files. The truth felt so close, she could almost taste it. But every time she tried to reach out and grasp it, the threads slipped through her fingers. And then there was Adrian. His name, his voice, the quiet moments shared between them, the way his presence lingered like a shadow in her mind. Every instinct screamed at her to stay focused on the case, to stay professional. But every time she thought of him, the lines between what was right and wrong, between justice and feelings, blurred just a little more. Sophia shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. This wasn't her. She didn't let personal feelings cloud her judgment. But even as she told herself that, she knew deep down that the connection she had with Adrian was impossible to ignore. The slow burn of attraction was undeniable. And the worst part? It wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Adrian wasn't just a criminal, a suspect, or a person she needed to bring to justice. He was a mirror, reflecting parts of her that she had long since buried, pain, loss, and a longing for connection that she had never admitted to. Her phone rang, snapping her out of her reverie. Sophia grabbed it quickly, hoping for a distraction, anything to keep her from spiraling further into the tangled mess of emotions that Adrian seemed to provoke. "Langley," she answered, trying to steady her breath. "It's Adrian," came his voice, smooth and familiar, sending a shiver down her spine. "We need to talk. There's more you need to know, more than you think." Sophia clenched her jaw, frustration building. "I've heard that before," she said, her voice firm, but there was an edge to it, a tremor that betrayed the emotions she had been fighting to suppress. "I'm not here to play games, Detective," Adrian replied, his tone serious now. "You're in over your head, and you're not the only one looking for answers." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Sophia could feel the pull of his voice, the magnetism that drew her in against her better judgment. But she was a professional. She couldn't afford to be distracted. "I'll come by your office in an hour. We'll talk then," Adrian added before the line went dead. Sophia sat in silence for a moment, staring at the phone in her hand. Her heart was racing again, a familiar tension building in her chest. This wasn't just about the case anymore. She wasn't sure when it had crossed that line, but somehow, she had become entangled in a web that wasn't just professional. It was personal, too. And she had no idea how to escape it. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. There was no turning back now. Sophia stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, adjusting her collar before heading out of her office. She had never been one for hesitation, but this, meeting Adrian again, made her stomach churn with a mix of anticipation and dread. She needed answers. She couldn't let her personal feelings cloud her judgment any longer. The case had to come first. But as she walked to her car, every step felt heavier, like the air around her was thickening with something she couldn't yet name. The drive to the meeting felt too short. As she pulled up to the address Adrian had given her, an old building with marble columns, her heart hammered in her chest. The grandiose architecture seemed to mock her, its pristine, polished surface hiding the corruption and deceit lurking beneath. The world Adrian inhabited was the same world she was trying to tear down, but it wasn't just the world that scared her. It was him. When she stepped into the building, the cool air hit her like a wave. The walls seemed to close in, filled with whispers and hidden secrets. Adrian was waiting for her in the lobby, leaning against a marble pillar, his back straight, his eyes fixed on her. He wore that same calm, collected expression, but there was something different about the way he held himself, more guarded, as if he too were aware of the stakes between them. "Sophia," he said, his voice low but carrying an undercurrent of something she couldn't place. "I'm glad you came." She nodded, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. "Let's get this over with." Adrian gave her a half smile. "I'm not here to play games, Detective. I'm here to help you." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't need your help." "You do," he replied, his voice steady as if he had already predicted her response. "The people you're going after, Ethan's death, wasn't a random act. It's bigger than you think, and it's about to get worse." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Adrian glanced around, his gaze darting briefly to the empty room before returning to her. "I know you think I'm part of the problem, but I'm not. I've been trying to stop it, just like you. The problem is, they're not going to stop until they've crushed everyone in their path." Sophia crossed her arms, skeptical. "And you think I should believe you?" For the first time, Adrian seemed to hesitate, his mask slipping for a second, revealing something more vulnerable beneath. "I think you have no choice," he said quietly. "You're in deeper than you know. And if you keep going down this road without understanding what's really at stake, it's not just your career on the line." Sophia was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had known that her pursuit of justice was dangerous, but she hadn't fully grasped just how far the web stretched. There was something in Adrian's eyes, something that told her he knew the game better than anyone, and that perhaps was what made him both an ally and a threat. She took a step toward him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "You can't just drop cryptic statements and expect me to trust you, Adrian. I'm not here to make friends." Adrian's lips quirked again, a hint of something like understanding in his expression. He moved slowly, as though weighing every word before speaking. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust yourself. You're closer to the truth than you think, but you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. And for what? To punish me? To expose me?" Sophia's breath caught. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm doing my job. My job is to find the truth." Adrian took a step closer, his voice low, but carrying a force that caught her off guard. "And what if the truth is something you can't handle? What if the truth is something you're not ready to face?" His words hung in the air like a threat, and Sophia felt a chill crawl up her spine. She didn't want to admit it, but she was afraid of what Adrian might know, what the truth might be. She was afraid of him, not because of his actions, but because of the way he seemed to hold all the answers just out of reach, tantalizing her, making her question everything she thought she knew. For a moment, they stood there, locked in a silent exchange. The tension between them was palpable, the space around them heavy with something unspoken. Then, to her surprise, Adrian did something that made her heart skip a beat. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He extended it to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Take this. It's the first step toward the truth. But be careful, Sophia. If you follow this path, there's no going back." Sophia hesitated, looking down at the paper in his hand. Her fingers brushed his for just a second as she took it from him, the touch sending a shiver down her spine. "I don't need your pity," she muttered, though the words felt hollow as soon as they left her lips. "I'm not giving you pity," Adrian replied quietly, his voice softer now. "I'm giving you a chance to see things clearly." Sophia stood there for a moment longer, her heart racing in her chest. She could feel the pull of the paper in her hand, the weight of what it represented. She didn't want to take it. She didn't want to let him in. But she knew she didn't have a choice. With a final glance at Adrian, she turned and walked out of the building, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear, doubt, and the undeniable truth that Adrian Stone had just given her a key to the next chapter of the investigation, and perhaps to something far darker than she was ready for. The wind was sharp against her skin as Sophia stepped into the street, the cool air cutting through her as if to remind her of the weight she carried. She clutched the small folded paper in her hand, its edges sharp against her palm, the ink on it almost seeming to burn a hole through the paper itself. She hadn't wanted to take it. She hadn't wanted to trust Adrian or anyone connected to the world she was desperately trying to expose. But there it was, the first step toward the truth, sitting in her pocket like a ticking time bomb. Sophia's breath came in shallow bursts as she walked toward her car. The tension in her chest hadn't loosened, and she could feel the pull of Adrian's words, the quiet challenge behind them. What if the truth was something she wasn't ready to face? It had gnawed at her since he spoke them. For the first time, the certainty of her investigation began to waver. Adrian had been right in one regard. She was in deeper than she thought. The further she went into this case, the more complicated it became, and the more blurred the lines between right and wrong seemed. Ethan's death was only the beginning. She had known that from the start. But now, with Adrian's cryptic warning and his unrelenting presence haunting her every thought, she wasn't sure where the line was anymore. When she reached her car, Sophia stopped for a moment, leaning against the cold metal, staring out into the empty street. She wasn't sure what she was afraid of. Was it the case itself? Or was it Adrian? His gaze, his words, the undeniable pull between them. She'd never been one to let emotions get in the way of her work, but this was different. This was personal. Sophia pulled the paper from her pocket, unfolding it with careful hands. The words were short, concise, but they sent a chill down her spine. "Meet me at the old docks tomorrow night. Midnight. You'll see the truth." The paper trembled slightly in her hand, the message clear. Adrian's offer wasn't just a clue, it was a challenge, a test of trust, a test of what she was willing to sacrifice for the truth. He wasn't asking for her trust. He was demanding it. Her fingers tightened around the paper as the familiar weight of duty settled over her shoulders once again. This case, Ethan's death, had already taken so much from her, and now Adrian was offering a path forward, but only at the cost of her own emotional integrity. She knew this game. She had played it countless times before, but this time, the stakes felt higher. The consequences more personal. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cold air fill her lungs, trying to clear her mind. She could feel her heartbeat quicken, the rush of blood in her ears louder than anything around her. The world seemed to narrow to just this one decision. She could walk away, ignore Adrian, and follow the path she knew best, the professional one. Or she could take a chance, meet him at the docks, and see where this twisted road would lead her. The sound of her phone buzzing in her pocket broke the stillness. She reached for it without thinking, her hands cold as she glanced at the screen. It was a text from her partner, Detective Marcus Daniels. "I need you to come in, Sophia. We've got another lead on Caldwell. It's important." She stared at the message for a long time. This was what she was trained to do. Focus on the case, follow the evidence, put everything else aside. But Adrian's words lingered in her mind, echoing in her thoughts. Was she really ready to keep walking down this path? To let go of everything she had built for the sake of justice? Or was she already too far gone, caught in the web of lies, power, and forbidden connection that Adrian had woven around her? Sophia put the phone back into her pocket and leaned her head against the car. The weight of the choice felt heavier than ever. She had always prided herself on her ability to compartmentalize, to focus solely on the facts, to leave her emotions at the door. But Adrian had seen through that. He had seen the cracks in her carefully constructed walls. She hadn't been ready for this, for the quiet vulnerability he had drawn out of her. She wasn't ready to face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to know the truth, because it meant finding something more than just the case. It meant finding the truth about herself, too. She straightened up, taking a deep breath, and made a decision. She wasn't going to run from this. Not anymore. Sophia sent a quick response to Marcus, telling him she'd meet him later, then turned toward the docks. Adrian's message was clear, and as much as it unsettled her, it also gave her something she hadn't had in a long time: a purpose beyond the case. She wasn't just a detective anymore. She was someone searching for answers that went deeper than anything she had ever imagined. The drive to the docks felt longer than it was, the night growing darker as she neared the waterfront. The sound of the ocean was distant, almost drowned out by the pounding of her heart. When she arrived, The old wooden pier loomed in front of her, empty and quiet under the moonlight. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves and the distant waves. Sophia parked her car and stepped out into the night, the cool air biting at her skin. She walked toward the pier, each step echoing in the silence, until she saw him. Adrian was standing at the edge of the dock, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. He didn't turn to face her when she approached, but she could feel his eyes on her, waiting. His presence was overwhelming, like a storm threatening to break, and for a moment, Sophia hesitated. This was it. The truth was close, but so was the danger of losing herself in it. "Are you ready?" Adrian asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Sophia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her chest. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, meeting his gaze. "No," she said softly, "but I will be." The moon hung high above the water, casting a pale light across the deserted dock. Adrian stood motionless, waiting for her response. Sophia's heart raced, but she didn't back down. She had crossed a line the moment she'd stepped out of her office, the moment she'd agreed to meet him here. Now, standing face to face with him on the edge of the world she was desperately trying to untangle, there was no turning back. Adrian's gaze never wavered, his eyes sharp in the dim light, studying her as though he were trying to read her every thought. "You don't trust me," he said softly, the words almost a statement rather than a question. Sophia remained silent, her breath catching in the cold air. She didn't need to respond. Adrian knew the truth, but it was more than just trust that was on the line. The moment she chose to walk this path with him, she was no longer just a detective. She was someone tangled in a much larger conspiracy, someone who could no longer turn a blind eye to the darkness behind the glittering facades of the high society she had once been a part of. The elite world she had grown up around was now suffocating her, pulling her deeper into a world of lies and danger. Adrian moved closer, his presence a force that both unsettled and captivated her. He took a step toward the edge of the dock, motioning for her to follow. "There are things you don't know, things you couldn't possibly know," he said quietly, his voice taking on a tone of careful deliberation. "But you're here now, so there's no going back." Sophia hesitated, torn between the deep, unsettling pull to know the truth and the gnawing fear of what that truth might be. The truth could shatter everything: her career, her ideals, and the fragile threads of who she thought she was. But there was no other choice. She had already come too far. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. Adrian nodded, his lips pulling into a thin line. "You're in the middle of a war, Sophia. A war that's been going on for years. Ethan's death? It's just the beginning." He stopped, turning toward the dark waters, his gaze distant. "Ethan wasn't just some rich playboy. He was involved in something much larger than you think. He knew things about the powerful families, the corruption, the deals that were being made behind closed doors. He was trying to take them down, and they didn't like it. They don't like anyone who challenges them. So they silenced him." Sophia felt the floor shift beneath her feet, the ground suddenly uncertain. "Who are these people?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her pulse raced, her mind racing to piece together the fragments Adrian was offering. Adrian turned, his face shadowed by the night. "I can't give you names just yet, but the people behind Ethan's death are the same ones who control everything, the ones who pull the strings in the government, in business, in the media. They've been getting away with it for decades, and they've made sure no one can touch them." Until now. Sophia's thoughts whirled. This wasn't just about solving Ethan's murder anymore. It was about something far bigger, a conspiracy that stretched through every corner of society. The stakes were no longer just her career or the truth. It was about survival. "Why are you telling me this?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. "You're a part of this. You're tied to these people. Why should I believe anything you say?" Adrian's eyes softened, his voice dropping to a more vulnerable tone. "Because I want to end it. Just like you do. I didn't get involved in this because I wanted power. I got involved because I saw what it was doing to people, and I've been trying to bring it down, but they're too powerful. But with you, together we can expose them. We can destroy everything they've built. But we have to move carefully. They're watching." Sophia took a step back, trying to process everything he was telling her. It was too much, too fast. But the pieces were falling into place. Ethan hadn't just been a victim. He had been a whistleblower, someone who had dared to stand up to the very system Sophia had once admired from a distance. And now, in the silence between them, she could feel the pull of Adrian's words, the truth that lingered between them like an unspoken promise. "You want me to trust you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After everything, after what you've been involved in, you want me to trust you." Adrian took a step toward her, his expression sincere, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her doubt him, made her fear him and desire him in equal measure. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said, his voice low. "I'm asking you to trust yourself. Trust that you can make the right decision, even when the truth is darker than anything you could imagine." Sophia felt a chill run through her. The truth was darker than she could ever have imagined, but as she looked into Adrian's eyes, she realized that she couldn't stop now. She had already crossed the threshold, the investigation, the case. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about something more personal, something that was entwined with the very core of who she was becoming. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. What's the next step? Adrian's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Meet me tomorrow. There's a safe house. I'll give you more information, but you have to be ready. This isn't something you can just walk away from." Sophia nodded, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She didn't know if she was ready for this, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. The investigation was no longer just about solving a crime. It was about uncovering the secrets of a corrupt world that had been hidden in plain sight, and she was now a part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The following day was a blur. Sophia barely slept, her mind racing with the events from the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's face, the way he had looked at her, the weight of his words settling deeper into her chest. He had warned her. He had told her that the truth would be darker than anything she could have imagined. And she believed him. Sophia knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant to be here. That this was the moment her life was meant to change. She couldn't ignore the pull, the strange connection she felt with Adrian. He was part of this world, the world she was fighting against, but there was something else about him, something she couldn't quite define. He wasn't just the criminal mastermind she had thought him to be. He was something more, someone with his own battles, his own demons. The safe house he had mentioned was located on the outskirts of the city, tucked away behind a veil of trees and hidden away from the prying eyes of the elite. Sophia arrived there just as dusk was beginning to fall, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the quiet street. She parked her car and stepped out, feeling the cool evening air wrap around her, a stark contrast to the tension that was coiled tightly within her. As she approached the small, nondescript house, Adrian was waiting for her outside, his silhouette blending into the shadows. His posture was relaxed, but there was a sharpness in the way he stood, as if he were always aware of his surroundings, always alert. "Sophia," Adrian greeted her softly, his voice carrying through the stillness of the night. "You came?" "Of course I came," she replied, though her voice was tight. "I told you I wanted the truth. You have it. Or at least you say you do." Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. "The truth isn't always something we want to hear, but it's the only thing that can set us free. Follow me." He turned and led her inside the house, the creak of the door echoing in the quiet space. The interior was sparse, minimalist in a way that felt almost purposeful, as though the house itself were a place of retreat, a place to hide from the world. There were no personal touches, no signs of warmth or life, just shadows and the quiet hum of a life lived in the margins. The following day was a blur. Sophia barely slept, her mind racing with the events from the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's face, the way he had looked at her, the weight of his words settling deeper into her chest. He had warned her. He had told her that the truth would be darker than anything she could have imagined, and she believed him. Sophia knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant to be here, that this was the moment her life was meant to change. She couldn't ignore the pull, the strange connection she felt with Adrian. He was part of this world, the world she was fighting against. But there was something else about him, something she couldn't quite define. He wasn't just the criminal mastermind she had thought him to be. He was something more, someone with his own battles, his own demons. The safe house he had mentioned was located on the outskirts of the city, tucked away behind a veil of trees and hidden away from the prying eyes of the elite. Sophia arrived there just as dusk was beginning to fall, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the quiet street. She parked her car and stepped out, feeling the cool evening air wrap around her, a stark contrast to the tension that was coiled tightly within her. As she approached the small, nondescript house, Adrian was waiting for her outside, his silhouette blending into the shadows. His posture was relaxed, but there was a sharpness in the way he stood, as if he were always aware of his surroundings, always alert. "Sophia," Adrian greeted her softly, his voice carrying through the stillness of the night. "You came." "Of course I came," she replied, though her voice was tight. "I told you I wanted the truth. You have it. Or at least you say you do." Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. "The truth isn't always something we want to hear, but it's the only thing that can set us free. Follow me." He turned and led her inside the house, the creak of the door echoing in the quiet space. The interior was sparse, minimalist, in a way that felt almost purposeful, as though the house itself were a place of retreat, a place to hide from the world. There were no personal touches, no signs of warmth or life, just shadows and the quiet hum of a life lived in the margins. Adrian's gaze softened, his eyes dark with something Sophia couldn't name. "You're not next, Sophia. You're already in it. You're already part of this, whether you like it or not. The question is, How far are you willing to go to expose the truth? The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. She had always prided herself on being the one who kept control, the one who followed the rules, the one who could uncover any crime and expose it to the world. But now, faced with the ugly reality of what she was up against, she wasn't so sure anymore. "You don't get to ask me that," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "I'm not like you, Adrian. I didn't ask for this. I'm just trying to solve a damn murder." Adrian's expression hardened slightly, but his eyes remained soft, understanding. "I know," he said quietly, "but you're not just solving a murder. You're uncovering something far more dangerous than you ever imagined. And the more you dig, the more you realize there's no way out of this. You're already in deep, and you're going to have to decide which side you're on. There are no more lines between good and bad, between right and wrong. It's all just shades of gray." Sophia felt a pang of doubt in her chest, a deep, gnawing feeling that she wasn't sure she could shake. The investigation had started out so simple, so clear in her mind, but now, everything was clouded, the truth slipping further out of reach with every new piece of the puzzle. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Adrian reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on hers. "I'm not asking you to keep doing this, Sophia. I'm asking you to see it through. Because there's no going back once you've started down this path. And I need you. We need each other if we're going to make it out of this alive." Sophia stared at him, feeling the weight of his words settle on her like a heavy cloak. She could feel the tension between them, the unspoken bond that had formed in the silence. But she didn't know if she could trust him, if she could trust anyone in this world of lies and betrayal. "I'm not ready," she whispered, her heart heavy with the enormity of the choice ahead. "You'll never be ready," Adrian replied softly, "but you're stronger than you think. And together, we can make them pay." Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. The following days dragged on in a haze of uncertainty. The investigation into Ethan's death consuming every waking moment of Sophia's life. She couldn't escape the weight of Adrian's words, his confession that the world she was trying to expose was far more dangerous and insidious than she could have imagined. She had agreed to meet him, to trust him with her pursuit of the truth. But something about his promises, about the way he seemed to pull her deeper into his web, made her uneasy. Sophia tried to focus on the case, burying herself in the details of Ethan's last days, tracing his steps, uncovering the connections he had made. But every time she tried to reach for the facts, her mind kept returning to Adrian. The more she saw him, the more complicated the situation became. She couldn't deny the magnetic pull between them, nor could she ignore the uncomfortable truth that Adrian was no mere informant. He was part of the very system she had sworn to take down. And yet, when she looked into his eyes, she saw something more, something vulnerable, something that spoke of the pain he had been carrying for far too long. But that didn't change the fact that he was lying. He had lied to her before, and she couldn't forget the warning in his voice when he'd told her how dangerous this all was. He wasn't just warning her about the criminals who ran the city, he was warning her about the people she could trust. And the people she couldn't. The betrayal came when she least expected it. Sophia had been working late in her office, her head spinning from the piles of evidence scattered around her desk. She had received a tip-off, something small, a name, a connection that could finally shed light on who was behind Ethan's murder. The hours had melted away, and as she rubbed her tired eyes, she heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she said without looking up, expecting it to be one of her colleagues. But when she looked up, her breath caught in her throat. Adrian stood there, his silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. His expression was unreadable, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something sharper, something darker. "Adrian," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, controlled, but there was an edge to it that made her uneasy. Sophia stood up slowly, instinctively reaching for the gun at her hip. "What's going on? You're not supposed to be here." Adrian's eyes flickered toward her weapon, but he made no move to reach for his own. Instead, he walked towards her desk, his gaze sweeping over the scattered papers, the photographs of Ethan, the connection she had just uncovered. "You're getting too close, Sophia," he said quietly, his voice colder than she had ever heard it before. "Too close to the truth." She frowned. "I'm just doing my job." "No," he replied, his eyes hardening. "You're doing more than that. You're digging into things that you can't understand. Things you shouldn't understand." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you saying?" Before she could react, Adrian moved swiftly, pulling a small envelope from inside his jacket and placing it on the desk in front of her. "You need to stop this," he said. "This is your last warning." Sophia stared at the envelope, her mind racing. What was he trying to say? Why was he so insistent on stopping her? She had never seen him like this. So cold, so distant. "What's in the envelope?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he stood there, watching her with an unreadable expression. The silence between them grew heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. With trembling hands, Sophia reached for the envelope and slowly opened it. Inside, she found a photograph. One of Ethan. Yes, but this one was different. It was a photo taken just days before his death, showing him with a man she didn't recognize. They were standing in front of a building, a familiar one that she had seen in her investigation, a building connected to one of the most powerful figures in the city. But what shocked her more than the photograph was the note attached to it, written in bold, scrawled handwriting. "This is bigger than you think. The person you're looking for is much closer than you realize. Trust no one, not even him." Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she looked up at Adrian, her mind reeling. "What is this? What's going on?" Adrian's expression remained impassive, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened, as though he were struggling to hold something back. "You're too deep in this, Sophia," he said quietly. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Sophia's mind raced. She had trusted Adrian, trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in this case. But now, everything was falling apart. The photograph, the cryptic message. It felt like a betrayal. The person she had been confiding in, the person who had promised to help her, had been leading her astray. And the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. "You've been using me," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Haven't you?" Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence between them was deafening, and for the first time, Sophia felt truly alone. Her trust in him, everything she had believed, had been shattered in an instant. The betrayal was clear. Adrian had been manipulating her all along, playing her for a fool, guiding her down a path she never should have followed. But the worst part was that she couldn't let go. Even now, she felt the pull of something deeper between them, a connection that she had tried so hard to ignore. Despite the lies, despite the deceit, a part of her still wanted to believe in him, still wanted to trust him. But she couldn't. Not anymore. Sophia stood there, the weight of the truth crashing down on her. "Get out," she said quietly, her voice low but resolute. "I don't want to see you again." Adrian's eyes flickered with something. Regret, maybe? But he didn't move. He stood there for a long moment, and for a second, Sophia thought he might say something, might try to explain. But then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing in the silence, holding the shattered pieces of her trust. Sophia stood in the middle of her office, the door clicking shut behind Adrian with finality. The silence that followed felt suffocating, her breath shallow as she tried to collect her thoughts. The weight of his betrayal hung heavy in the air, but even heavier was the feeling of loss. Loss of trust, of certainty, of the connection she had allowed herself to believe in, however briefly. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but the truth was now inescapable. Adrian had played her, and in doing so, had shattered something inside her. She had trusted him more than anyone else. They had shared moments of vulnerability, of raw, unguarded truth. He had led her to believe they were on the same side. But now, as the reality of the situation settled in, she realized how foolish she had been. The photograph he had left her with was still on the desk, the ink of the cryptic message still burning into her mind. The person you're looking for is much closer than you realize. Trust no one, not even him. Sophia rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of the investigation pressing down on her. Adrian had been right about one thing. This was bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't just about exposing the criminals behind Ethan's death. It was about something far more insidious, something that ran deeper through the veins of power and wealth in the city. But Adrian's betrayal had blurred the lines of everything she thought she understood. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. It was Marcus, her partner. She had avoided his calls since the night at the docks. She knew what he would want, an update on the case, on what she had uncovered, on where they were heading next. Sophia's stomach turned. She couldn't give him the answers he was looking for, not without betraying herself, not without acknowledging the complicated mess of emotions that had entangled her. But she also couldn't ignore him. Not now. Not when the case was spiraling out of control. With a shaky breath, she answered the call. "Marcus." "Where have you been, Sophia?" His voice was strained, anxious. "We need to talk. There's been another lead. You're not answering my calls and—" "I know," she interrupted, her voice cold and distant. "I've been busy." "Busy? Busy with what?" "You've been all over the place. You're not giving me the full picture." "What's going on?" Marcus pressed. "You've got to tell me what you found. This is bigger than we thought, Sophia. You need to trust me here." Sophia's chest tightened at his words. Trust. The word echoed in her mind, cutting deeper than she was prepared for. Could she trust anyone? Could she trust Marcus, who had always been her partner, the one she had worked alongside without question? Or was she destined to lose herself in a world where trust was nothing more than a fleeting illusion? "I'm coming in," Marcus continued, his tone softening. "We need to figure this out together. You don't have to do this alone." The words should have been comforting, but they only made her feel more isolated, alone. That was the only word she could wrap her mind around now. Alone in this fight, alone in her pursuit of justice, and alone in the tangled mess of emotions that Adrian had thrown into chaos. She was no longer sure who the enemy was: Adrian, the criminals behind Ethan's death, or the darker truth she was starting to uncover about herself. She had been fighting for justice, for Ethan's memory, but in doing so, she had let herself fall into a world she couldn't fully control. A world where people like Adrian existed, and where the line between right and wrong was so blurred that she wasn't sure where she stood anymore. "I'll meet you at the office," she said, her voice strained. "I need time to think. I'll have answers soon." The call ended abruptly, and Sophia was left standing in the empty office, the silence pressing in around her. The weight of her choices felt like a lead weight, pressing down on her chest. She had a job to do. She had to find the truth about Ethan's death, but what if that truth led her to a place she wasn't ready to face? What if the only way to uncover it was to tear apart the life she had built for herself, the very foundation of her beliefs? She looked back at the photo on her desk, the faces of Ethan and the unknown man seared into her memory. She had thought that justice was simple, that right and wrong were clear. But the more she uncovered, the less certain she became. Sophia turned away from the desk and walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. The night was quiet, but the shadows of the past loomed large in her mind. She couldn't undo what had been done, couldn't change the fact that Adrian had betrayed her. But there was still the case, the truth she was chasing, even if it meant she had to walk alone in the darkness to find it. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts, and she turned to find Marcus standing in the doorway, his face etched with concern. He didn't wait for her to invite him in, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Sophia," he began softly, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "What's going on? I can tell something's not right." She couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. Instead, she focused on the photo of Ethan, the image of the man who had set this all in motion. The pain she had buried deep inside her began to surface, but she pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. "I'm just trying to put the pieces together, Marcus," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'm just trying to figure out what happened to Ethan." "But that's the thing," Marcus said, stepping closer to her, his hand resting on the back of the chair. "You can't do this alone. You don't have to. Let me help you." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let him in. But how could she? How could she trust anyone when the very world she had known was built on lies? Adrian had already proven that trust was a fragile thing, and now, as she looked at Marcus, she couldn't help but wonder, was he a part of the same system she was trying to tear down? For a moment, the world felt small, too small for the weight of the decisions she had to make. Sophia closed her eyes, her fingers clenched around the edge of the desk, and then she turned to face Marcus. "I need time to figure this out," she whispered, "but I can't promise anything." Sophia didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the events of the day, the betrayal, the photograph, Adrian's cold warning. The case, once straightforward, now seemed like an inescapable labyrinth. Ethan's death had been just the beginning, and now the path ahead was darker, more twisted than she ever imagined. The weight of Adrian's words echoed in her mind, the question lingering. How far are you willing to go to expose the truth? She stared at the ceiling, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She had been a detective for years, relied on her intuition and instincts, but now, faced with this conspiracy, she felt like a child standing in a dark room, unable to find the light switch. Was Adrian right? Was this really bigger than she had anticipated, or had he just used her, manipulated her into believing his version of the truth? She thought of Marcus, his concerned voice, his promises to help her. He was her partner, her friend, and he cared about her. But did he truly understand what was at stake here? Did he know the depths of corruption they were up against? Or was he blind to it all? Just another pawn in the game. The betrayal was eating away at her. Adrian's words about trust had cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She had allowed herself to believe in him, even in the moments when she knew she shouldn't. And now, everything was a lie. Sophia swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet hitting the cold floor. She grabbed the case file that had been sitting untouched on her desk and began flipping through the pages. There had to be something she was missing, some connection she hadn't seen. She needed to move forward. The pain of the betrayal was nothing compared to the pain of not knowing the truth. Her fingers skimmed over the photographs of Ethan, over the names and addresses, the phone records and emails. But it was the photograph of Ethan with the unknown man that stopped her cold. She pulled it out again, staring at the image. The man standing beside Ethan looked familiar, but she couldn't place him. There was something about his posture, his face, that felt like a key to everything. Sophia reached for her phone and began searching the name of the building in the background of the photo. Minutes passed as she scrolled through news reports and old articles until something caught her eye. The building in the photograph wasn't just any office building. It was the headquarters of a prominent law firm, one with deep ties to the city's most influential families. The name of the firm was printed in bold letters: Brenner, Harkins, and Walker. Sophia felt her heart race. She had heard of the firm before, but she had never considered that they might be involved in the case. The firm's partners were known for their connections to the city's elite, people whose names were whispered in back rooms, who controlled the flow of money, power, and politics. The puzzle pieces were starting to come together, but they led her to a place she wasn't ready to go. She reached for the photo again, her mind working in overdrive. The man beside Ethan had to be connected to the firm. He had to be. But the question was, who was he? What role did he play in Ethan's death? Sophia grabbed her jacket, determination rising within her. She had to go to the firm. She had to find out who the man was and what connection he had to Ethan. This was her only lead, the only clue that hadn't slipped through her fingers. And if it led her to the truth, to the people behind Ethan's death, then she would follow it, no matter the cost. The law firm was a gleaming monument of wealth and power, its marble pillars towering over the street as if daring anyone to look up. Sophia stood across the street watching the entrance, her mind racing. She had been here before. Years ago, when she was just starting out as a detective, visiting the firm with a case that had been quietly swept under the rug. It was a place for the powerful, the untouchable. And yet, here she was, about to walk through its doors in search of answers. She took a deep breath and walked across the street, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty space between the sidewalks. The glass doors opened with a soft whoosh as she entered, the air inside crisp and sterile. She approached the front desk, where a young woman looked up at her with a neutral expression. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her voice polite but guarded. "I'm here to see someone from the firm. I need some information," Sophia replied, her tone calm but firm. The receptionist's eyes flickered briefly to Sophia's badge, but she didn't respond right away. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Sophia hesitated for a moment. She could feel the weight of her words before she spoke them. "I'm investigating the death of Ethan Caldwell. I need to speak with someone who might be able to help." The receptionist's face remained impassive, but there was a slight tension in the air. "I'll need to check with the appropriate person. Please wait here." Sophia watched her leave, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been one to play games, but she knew that this was no ordinary visit. The people who worked here didn't operate in the open, and they certainly didn't welcome unwanted attention. If she wasn't careful, this could be the end of her investigation. Or worse. The receptionist returned moments later, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Walker will see you now. Please follow me." Sophia followed her down a long hallway, the sleek modern decor of the firm's offices feeling almost suffocating in its cold perfection. She felt her pulse quicken as they approached an office at the end of the hall. The door opened before she had a chance to knock, and a tall man with graying hair and a sharp suit stepped out. "Sophia Langley?" he said, his voice smooth but lacking warmth. "I'm Richard Walker. Please, come in." Sophia stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning the room. The office was large, filled with expensive furniture and bookshelves that lined the walls. But it was the man who stood behind the desk, Richard Walker, that caught her attention. There was something about him that seemed too polished, too perfect. And yet, in the back of her mind, a quiet alarm began to ring. This was no coincidence. Walker knew more than he was letting on. "Mr. Walker," Sophia said, taking a seat, "I need to ask you about Ethan Caldwell." The air in Richard Walker's office was heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Sophia sat across from him, her posture as professional as she could muster, though the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands gripped the edge of her chair betrayed the unease she felt. She had walked into this firm with only a sliver of hope that she could find the answers she needed. But now, faced with Walker's cold, calculating demeanor, that hope seemed to evaporate like mist in the early morning. Richard Walker stood by his desk, his hands clasped together in front of him, his eyes never leaving hers. His gaze was sharp, assessing, and his silence was a deliberate challenge. He was waiting for her to speak first, to reveal her cards before he made his move. Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't afford to show weakness. She couldn't afford to let him see how rattled she was by the events of the last few days. The betrayal by Adrian, the mounting pressure of the investigation, the growing sense of hopelessness that gnawed at her. She was a detective, trained to remain composed, to stay in control of every situation. But this was different. This was personal. "I'm investigating the death of Ethan Caldwell," she began, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "And I need to know what your firm has to do with it." Walker didn't flinch, but a slight tightening of his jaw told her that her question had struck a nerve. "Ethan was a client of ours," he said coolly, his eyes never leaving hers. "He was involved in some business matters with a few of our more prominent clients. But that's all." Sophia watched him carefully, her instincts screaming that there was more to the story than he was letting on. The way he had said, "prominent clients," as though the words were meant to convey something she wasn't supposed to ask about, made her question every word that came out of his mouth. I need more than that, she replied, her voice sharp. Who did Ethan meet with in the days leading up to his death? What was he involved in? And why did he end up dead in the first place? Richard's lips tightened, and for a moment Sophia thought he might refuse to answer. Instead, he leaned back against his desk, his hands folding in front of him. Detective Langley, I think you're overstepping your bounds, he said, his tone cool and controlled. You're asking questions that you have no right to ask. Ethan's death was tragic, but it is none of your concern. You should let the professionals handle this. Sophia's pulse quickened. His words stung, but there was something more. Something in the way he avoided answering her questions, something in the way his gaze flickered to the door behind her, as if he were already considering an escape route. She could feel it now. The shift in the room, the shift in him.
There was something here that he was hiding, something he didn't want her to uncover. I think you're hiding something, Mr. Walker, she said, her voice low but firm. And I'm not going to stop until I find out what it is. For the briefest moment, she saw a flicker of something, fear maybe, behind his eyes. It was gone in an instant, but it was enough to make her heart race. This man was involved in something far bigger than she had realized, and he knew it. But the question was, what was his role in it all? Walker straightened up, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've got spirit, Detective. I'll give you that. But you're playing a dangerous game. You don't know who you're dealing with. Sophia's mind raced. What was he implying? Who was he protecting? She leaned forward slightly, her voice low, her words heavy with a determination she hadn't fully realized she possessed. I don't care who I'm dealing with. What I care about is finding out the truth. If your firm is involved in Ethan's death, I'll find out. No one is above the law. Walker's smile faded, and for the first time, Sophia saw the coldness in his eyes. He wasn't just dismissing her. He was warning her. But it wasn't enough to deter her. Not now. Not when she was this close. You should leave, Detective, Walker said quietly, his voice now more like a command. Before you regret it? Sophia stood up slowly, her mind still racing. She had no answers yet, no solid proof. But something in the way Walker had reacted told her she was on the right track. She wasn't going to let this man intimidate her. She wasn't going to stop until she found the truth, no matter the cost. As she turned to leave, Walker's voice stopped her. You have no idea what you're getting into, Sophia, he said, his tone now tinged with something dark. This isn't just about Ethan. This is bigger than you think, and you're already too deep. Walk away while you still can. Sophia paused, her hand on the door handle, her heart pounding in her chest. His words rang in her ears, warning her, but something deep inside her refused to listen. She couldn't walk away. Not now. She wasn't the kind of person who would back down when the truth was just out of reach. I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Walker, she said, her voice firm, and I'm not walking away. She left his office with the door clicking shut behind her, but as she stepped out into the cool air of the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped deeper into a world of shadows and lies. The path ahead was more dangerous than she had realized, and the truth she was seeking might just cost her everything. But there was no turning back now. The night felt endless as Sophia walked back to her car. Every step echoed in her mind, a reminder of how deep she had dug herself into this mess. The truth, so elusive just days ago, now felt like it was slipping through her fingers. But what she had learned from her confrontation with Richard Walker, what had shaken her to her core, was the undeniable fact that she was getting closer. She had been right all along. Ethan's death wasn't random, and neither was Adrian's involvement. This wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about survival. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She couldn't trust anyone. The people she thought she could lean on, Adrian, Marcus, even the connections she had worked so hard to build, were all part of a world that seemed designed to break her. This was no longer just a case. It was a battle for her own redemption. She arrived back at her apartment hours later, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Inside, everything felt small and oppressive. She had tried to keep her personal life separate from her work, but now it all seemed to blend together in a confusing mess. Her career, her trust in others, her beliefs about justice. It all felt like it was crumbling around her. The phone rang, its sudden ring slicing through the quiet apartment like a knife. Her hand shook as she reached for it, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew who it was before she even looked at the screen. Adrian. She hesitated for a moment, the desire to pick up and hear his voice battling with the need to protect herself from the vulnerability he seemed to bring out in her. But it wasn't just Adrian anymore. This was the crossroads. She needed answers, and if Adrian had them, she couldn't afford to ignore him. Taking a deep breath, she answered the call. Adrian. Sophia. His voice came through the phone, low and steady. There was something different in it tonight. A weight, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. I need you to listen carefully. She could feel the tension in his voice, the undercurrent of urgency that caught her attention. She braced herself, knowing that whatever he was about to say would tip the balance one way or another. What is it? She asked, her voice a little shakier than she would have liked. I've been in touch with someone, Adrian said, his words clipped. Someone who knows the people behind this, the ones pulling the strings. But it's more dangerous than I thought. They know I'm getting close and they know you're involved. Sophia's breath hitched, the unease growing inside her. What are you saying? What does this have to do with me? There's a price for this, Sophia. You're not going to like it. But if you want to stop this, if you want to expose them, you need to make a choice. Her heart raced. The stakes had always been high, but now it felt like everything was teetering on the edge. What choice was Adrian talking about? What sacrifice was she going to have to make to end this once and for all? Make a choice about what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth doesn't come free, Adrian replied. To expose them, you need to destroy everything they've built, everything they've corrupted. But to do that, you're going to have to let go of the one thing you've held on to, the one thing that's kept you grounded, your sense of right and wrong, your justice. Sophia's mind raced. Adrian was asking her to sacrifice her very beliefs, everything that had kept her from falling into the same pit of corruption that Ethan had. She wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of choice. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. You want me to give up my career, my sense of justice? For this? Yes, Adrian's voice was calm, but the edge in it was undeniable. Because this isn't just a fight for justice anymore, Sophia. This is a fight for survival. You can't walk away from this no matter how much you want to. They won't let you. The silence between them stretched, and in that silence, everything shifted. The man who had once seemed like her ally, the man who had made her feel like she wasn't alone in this, now seemed like a reminder of just how far she had fallen. Adrian had been right. The lines between right and wrong were blurring, and now there was no going back. Tell me what to do, she said, the words feeling like a betrayal as they left her lips. But there was no turning back now. Not after everything she had learned. Not after everything she had sacrificed. She couldn't pull away, she couldn't let go. She needed to know the truth. I'm sending you something, Adrian said. A safe location, a place where you'll find the documents, the evidence, everything you need to expose them. But you're going to have to destroy everything in your path. Trust no one. The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. She had never been one to shy away from danger, but this was something else entirely. She wasn't just fighting criminals. She was fighting a system that had been built over decades, a system that had consumed everything in its path, including the people who thought they could change it. Sophia was already in too deep. There was no way out now. I'll do it, she said, her voice firm despite the doubt gnawing at her insides. She didn't know if she was making the right choice, but she had no other option. It was time to confront the darkness she had been chasing and destroy it, no matter the cost. Be careful, Sophia, Adrian warned, his tone softer now, almost regretful. You don't know what you're up against. You're going to have to sacrifice more than you realize." "I know," she replied, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I'm ready." The line went silent. Adrian didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. The decision had been made. And now, Sophia had to live with the consequences. She stared out the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, the shadows of what was to come creeping in at the edges of her mind. She didn't know how much of herself she was willing to lose, but she knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back. The city was alive beneath the dark sky, a sea of lights flickering and shimmering like stars that had fallen from the heavens. But for Sophia, the world felt darker than it ever had before. The weight of her choices pressed on her, every breath feeling heavier, every step feeling more uncertain. She had been part of this world of power and secrets long enough to know that there was no turning back, but the question lingered. Was she ready to pay the price? Sophia sat in her car, staring at the address Adrian had sent her, her knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. The GPS directed her to a part of the city she hadn't visited before, a dilapidated warehouse at the edge of town, surrounded by abandoned buildings and rusted fences. It was a place meant for hiding, for secrets buried too deep to see the light of day. The perfect place to confront the darkness she had been chasing. She could still hear Adrian's voice in her head, warning her about the cost, reminding her that the line between right and wrong had already blurred. Trust no one. The words echoed in her mind like a mantra.
The irony wasn't lost on her. She had already trusted Adrian, trusted him more than anyone, and now that trust had led her here, to a place where the truth could either destroy everything or give her the answers she so desperately needed. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from Marcus. "Where are you? This is getting serious. I need you here." The words were a lifeline, a reminder of the person she used to be, the detective who fought for justice, who believed in doing things the right way. But that person felt like a stranger now, lost in the web of lies and betrayals that had ensnared her. She couldn't go back to the way things were, not after everything she had learned. And if she was honest with herself, she didn't know if she wanted to anymore. Sophia stared at the text for a moment longer, her heart heavy. She should respond. She should tell Marcus the truth, bring him in on this, share everything she knew. But the words didn't come. Instead, she placed the phone back in her pocket and stepped out of the car. The air was cool, biting at her skin as she walked toward the warehouse. The place felt abandoned, as though it had been forgotten by the city and by time itself. The faint sound of the wind whistling through the cracked windows sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just a building. It was a tomb for the secrets that had been buried here. Secrets she was about to unearth. The door creaked loudly as she pushed it open, the sound echoing in the emptiness. The warehouse inside was dark, save for a single overhead light that illuminated a small, cluttered table in the center of the room. And standing there, waiting for her, was Adrian. He was dressed in black, his expression unreadable. There was no warmth in his gaze, no sign of the man who had once made her believe that they were on the same side. Now, he was just another player in this dangerous game, and she was his pawn. "Are you sure about this?" Adrian asked quietly, his voice low but steady. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to say yes, to reassure herself that she was doing the right thing, that she wasn't going down a path from which she could never return. But the truth was, she wasn't sure. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. "I don't have a choice," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I need to know the truth." Adrian nodded slowly, almost as though he had expected her answer. "Then you're ready." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the table. On it lay a stack of papers, photographs. and a small, unmarked envelope. Sophia walked toward it, her steps hesitant but determined. As her fingers brushed the papers, she felt the weight of the decision she had just made. She had crossed the line. There was no turning back. "Everything you need is in there," Adrian said. "It's all connected to Ethan's death. It's bigger than anything you could imagine." Sophia didn't need to ask what it was. She knew. The conspiracy. The people behind the elite world she had spent her career investigating. The truth that had been hidden from the public for years. And now, as she looked down at the documents in front of her, she realized that she was no longer just a part of the investigation. She was a part of the story itself, a story that was about to come crashing down around her. She picked up the envelope and opened it carefully, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled out a series of photographs. The first one was of Ethan, his face smiling, seemingly happy. But the second one was the one that stopped her heart. It was a photograph of Ethan and Richard Walker, the man from the law firm, standing together outside the same building where the elites held their secret meetings. They were laughing, talking, but there was something off about the way they were positioned. It wasn't just a friendly photo. It was a photo of two people who had been in on something together. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she flipped through the rest of the photographs. They were all of the same group of people, all connected to the law firm, all tied to the web of power and corruption that had swallowed Ethan and now threatened to swallow her too. But it was the last photograph that made her freeze. It was a picture of her, taken without her knowledge, standing outside her apartment building, looking up at the night sky. She hadn't seen the camera, hadn't known she was being watched, but someone had been watching her. Her fingers clenched around the photograph as she looked up at Adrian, her heart racing. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why am I in this?" Adrian's eyes softened, but there was a hard edge to his voice when he spoke. "You're a part of this, Sophia, whether you want to be or not. You've been marked." Sophia felt the weight of his words sink into her chest, a chill creeping down her spine. She had crossed the line. She had made a choice. And now, there was no going back. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had already trusted Adrian, trusted him more than anyone. And now, that trust had led her here, to a place where the truth could either destroy everything or give her the answers she so desperately needed. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from Marcus. "Where are you? This is getting serious. I need you here." The words were a lifeline, a reminder of the person she used to be, the detective who fought for justice, who believed in doing things the right way. But that person felt like a stranger now, lost in the web of lies and betrayals that had ensnared her. She couldn't go back to the way things were, not after everything she had learned. And if she was honest with herself, she didn't know if she wanted to anymore. Sophia stared at the text for a moment longer, her heart heavy. She should respond. She should tell Marcus the truth, bring him in on this, share everything she knew. But the words didn't come. Instead, she placed the phone back in her pocket and stepped out of the car. The air was cool, biting at her skin as she walked toward the warehouse. The place felt abandoned, as though it had been forgotten by the city and by time itself. The faint sound of the wind whistling through the cracked windows sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just a building. It was a tomb for the secrets that had been buried here. Secrets she was about to unearth. The door creaked loudly as she pushed it open, the sound echoing in the emptiness. The warehouse inside was dark, save for a single overhead light that illuminated a small, cluttered table in the center of the room. and standing there waiting for her was Adrian. He was dressed in black, his expression unreadable. There was no warmth in his gaze, no sign of the man who had once made her believe that they were on the same side. Now, he was just another player in this dangerous game, and she was his pawn. "Are you sure about this?" Adrian asked quietly, his voice low but steady. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to say yes, to reassure herself that she was doing the right thing, that she wasn't going down a path from which she could never return. But the truth was, she wasn't sure. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. "I don't have a choice," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I need to know the truth." Adrian nodded slowly, almost as though he had expected her answer. "Then you're ready." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the table. On it lay a stack of papers, photographs, and a small, unmarked envelope. Sophia walked toward it, her steps hesitant but determined. As her fingers brushed the papers, she felt the weight of the decision she had just made. She had crossed the line. There was no turning back. "Everything you need is in there," Adrian said. "It's all connected to Ethan's death. It's bigger than anything you could imagine." Sophia didn't need to ask what it was. She knew. The conspiracy. The people behind the elite world she had spent her career investigating. The truth that had been hidden from the public for years. And now, as she looked down at the documents in front of her, she realized that she was no longer just a part of the investigation. She was a part of the story itself, a story that was about to come crashing down around her. She picked up the envelope and opened it carefully, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled out a series of photographs. The first one was of Ethan, his face smiling, seemingly happy. But the second one was the one that stopped her heart. It was a photograph of Ethan and Richard Walker, the man from the law firm, standing together outside the same building where the elites held their secret meetings. They were laughing, talking, but there was something off about the way they were positioned. It wasn't just a friendly photo. It was a photo of two people who had been in on something together. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she flipped through the rest of the photographs. They were all of the same group of people, all connected to the law firm, all tied to the web of power and corruption that had swallowed Ethan and now threatened to swallow her too. But it was the last photograph that made her freeze. It was a picture of her, taken without her knowledge, standing outside her apartment building, looking up at the night sky. She hadn't seen the camera, hadn't known she was being watched, but someone had been watching her. Her fingers clenched around the photograph as she looked up at Adrian, her heart racing. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why am I in this?" Adrian's eyes softened, but there was a hard edge to his voice when he spoke. "You're a part of this, Sophia, whether you want to be or not. You've been marked." Sophia felt the weight of his words sink into her chest, a chill creeping down her spine. She had crossed the line. She had made a choice. And now, there was no going back. Sophia stood in the dimly lit warehouse, the photograph still clutched in her hand, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. The pieces were all there. Ethan's death, the law firm, the mysterious figures in the background, and now, her own involvement in something so much larger than herself. The fear, the disbelief, the anger. It all swirled inside her, consuming her thoughts, but none of it seemed to matter in the face of the reality that was unfolding before her. She turned her gaze back to Adrian, the man who had dragged her into this world of shadows and lies. He was standing quietly by the table, his expression unreadable, as though he were waiting for her to process everything she had learned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, charged with the weight of everything that had passed between them, the moments of connection, the shared pain, the betrayals, and the truths that had shattered them both. "You knew," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew what this would cost me, what it would cost us." Adrian's gaze softened, and for the first time, Sophia saw a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes. "I didn't want this for you. I didn't want to bring you into this world." He paused, his voice becoming more distant. "But you already were. You've always been a part of this, Sophia. The moment you started digging into Ethan's death, you were already marked. You just didn't know it." Sophia took a deep breath, her fingers still clutching the photograph. She had wanted answers, had thought that the truth would set everything right. But now, it only felt like it had unraveled everything she had fought for, everything she had believed in. She had once prided herself on her ability to separate her emotions from her work, to stay calm in the face of danger. But Adrian had broken down those walls piece by piece, until there was nothing left but raw emotion and uncertainty. "I trusted you," she said, her voice thick with frustration and hurt. "I let you in, and now I don't even know who you really are anymore." Adrian looked down, his jaw tightening as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I didn't want you to trust me," he replied quietly. "I didn't want you to get this close. I thought I could keep you safe by keeping you at arm's length, but I was wrong. I never should have dragged you into this." Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the sting of his words. She had never wanted to be part of this world. She had only wanted to find the truth, to expose the lies that had claimed Ethan's life. But now, everything she thought she knew about justice, about right and wrong, seemed blurred, distorted by the reality of the people she was up against. She had never realized how much she had allowed Adrian into her world until it was too late. And yet, despite everything, despite the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, there was still something in her that couldn't let go. Something deep inside her that clung to the connection they had shared, even if that connection had been born in a world of deception. "You said we could bring them down," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she looked up at him. "You said we could expose them?" Adrian nodded, his gaze unwavering. "We can, but not without a price. It won't be easy. It's never been easy. But if you're in this with me, if you're willing to do what it takes..." He let the sentence hang in the air, the weight of his words heavy with meaning. "I'll be there with you, every step of the way." Sophia stood there, her heart racing, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. This wasn't what she had imagined when she started her career. This wasn't the clean, clear-cut path she had always believed in. But it was the reality now, and no matter how much she wanted to walk away, she couldn't. The truth was too far gone, too close to the surface. She had already crossed the line. "I'm not like you, Adrian," she said quietly, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and resignation. "I don't know if I can be like you, but I can't walk away from this. Not now. Not when I'm so close." He stepped forward, the distance between them closing as if there had never been a divide to begin with. His gaze was steady, but there was a softness in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. It was the softness of someone who understood the cost of the choice she was about to make, someone who knew the sacrifices she would have to face. "I won't ask you to be like me," Adrian said softly. "I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to fight for what's right."
Sophia felt the weight of his words settle into her bones. The road ahead would be long, and it would be filled with more pain, more betrayal. She knew that now. But for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of clarity amidst the chaos. She wasn't just fighting for Ethan anymore. She wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for herself, for the person she was becoming, the person who could face the darkness and still stand strong. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "But you're right about one thing, this isn't going to be easy. And I'm not doing it alone. If you're going to help me, we do this together. No more lies, no more games." Adrian gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. Together? For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of their shared understanding hanging in the air like an unspoken promise. There was no going back now. The choices had been made, and the path ahead was set. Sophia knew that the fight was just beginning, and though the road would be long and the stakes higher than she had ever imagined, she was ready for whatever came next. Because, for the first time, she wasn't walking this path alone. The next few days blurred together, each moment heavier than the last as Sophia dove deeper into the case. She met with Adrian several times, their conversations increasingly strained but undeniably productive. Every piece of the puzzle they uncovered, every new lead they followed, brought them closer to exposing the network that had claimed Ethan's life. But with each new discovery, the dangers grew. The lines between right and wrong became even more difficult to discern. And the deeper they dug, the more it became clear that there was no safe way to navigate this world. Sophia couldn't shake the thought that she was losing herself in it, that she was becoming someone she didn't recognize. She had always prided herself on being a person of principle, of conviction. But now, as she sat in her small, dimly lit office, staring at the stack of evidence in front of her, she wondered if she could still call herself that. Could she still be the person she wanted to be? The person who believed in justice and truth when the world around her was nothing but shades of gray? The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Her fingers instinctively reached for it, knowing who it was before she even looked at the screen. "Adrian?" she said, her voice tense. "It's time," Adrian's voice came through the phone, urgent but calm. "We've got what we need, but this is the moment. We can expose them now, Sophia. We can bring them all down." Sophia swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. This was it. The culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed. But something was gnawing at her. She couldn't shake the fear that there was a cost to all of this, a cost beyond just her career, beyond her moral compass. "Are you sure this is the right time?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "What if we're not ready? What if—" "There's no perfect time, Sophia," Adrian interrupted, his voice firm. "We can't wait any longer. Every minute we hesitate, they get closer. We expose them now, or we lose everything." She sat back in her chair, feeling the familiar weight of indecision creep up on her. She had trusted Adrian. She had believed in him, in the promise of justice. But could she really go through with this? Could she really expose the people behind Ethan's death, knowing what it might cost? Knowing what it might do to her? "I'm ready," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'll do it. We expose them. Together." Adrian's voice softened, a slight relief in his tone. "We've got this, Sophia. We've already won. All that's left is taking down the people who've been hiding in the shadows for far too long." Sophia took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. There was no turning back now. This was the moment. She had made the decision. She had chosen the path that led to truth, to justice, to the very heart of the corruption that had taken so much from her. But there was no easy way out. No one would come out of this unscathed. The choice had been made, and now, all she could do was face the consequences. An hour later, she stood outside a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, the final location they had tracked down from the evidence. This was it, the safe house, the place where they would finally take down the criminals that had been pulling the strings all along. Adrian was already there, waiting for her, his figure just barely visible in the shadows of the alley. She approached him slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. They had been through so much together, and now, at the end of everything, it came down to this final confrontation. "This is it," Sophia said quietly, her voice barely audible. "This is where it ends." Adrian nodded, his face grim but resolute. "We do this right, Sophia. We expose them. No more half measures. This ends tonight." Together, they walked toward the building, the air heavy with anticipation. Every step they took brought them closer to the truth, to the end of this long, difficult road. But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something that would leave a mark on her forever. They reached the door, and Adrian pushed it open. Inside, a group of figures waited, their faces hidden in the shadows, their voices low as they spoke in hushed tones. Sophia felt the cold rush of adrenaline as they stepped forward, ready to face the enemy, ready to tear down the system that had been built on lies and bloodshed. As Adrian handed her the final document, the one that would expose everything, Sophia felt a shift within herself. She wasn't just a detective anymore. She was a part of this world, this battle for truth, this fight for justice. But she was also more than that. She was a woman who had fought for what she believed in, a woman who had faced betrayal, pain, and fear, and had still come out on the other side. This wasn't just about the case. It wasn't just about Ethan's death or the criminals they were about to expose. This was about her, about the person she had become in the process. And no matter what happened next, Sophia knew that she had reclaimed something she had lost along the way, herself. She turned to Adrian, her heart steady now, her resolve stronger than ever. "Let's do this," she said, her voice firm. Together, they stepped forward, ready to take down the enemies that had shaped their lives. It wasn't just the end of the case, it was the beginning of something new.